I would like to take you just outside of what we think of as normal in schools. And I want to take you outside of what's normal in business as well. CEO, HR, command and control, wallet card with the vision statement on it. And I want to take you outside what's normal in community. A lot of different people who all live on a planet together and haven't yet figured out how to talk to each other about how to do that effectively. And the good news is these places are already in America, and they're already all around us. And I'm going to tell you about 3 kinds of places now that I think offer us a chance to transform this way of communicating so that we can learn new ways. The first is co-working. Some of you have probably heard of co-working spaces. As the economy compressed, independent professionals got together and said, you know what, I'm sitting at home not wearing pants trying to start a company. Maybe we'll get together and we'll set up an office environment together, and I'll have a desk where I can sit and work with you and we can share ideas. As technology got more popular, hackerspaces started to form. All those geeks who suddenly became fashionable wanted to make friends with all the other geeks. So they got together and built clubhouses where they could experiment with technology, robotics, soldering, software development, app development, all those kinds of things. And then the third type of place, which has been forming over the country, is the makerspace. Now this is a place where there are tools and equipment for engineers, artisans, artists, everything from power tools to stages, art supplies to 3D printers that people can use to build and invent new products and new ideas every day. What's really interesting to me, though, is the population of people who are doing this. 3 generations who are working together, right? The teens of today who are desperate for a near future example of themselves that they can look at and go, wow, those people are excited about what they do. They want to put their hands on these tools. They want to share their story online. And they can't learn how to do that in school. Now the next generation, these 24 to 39-year-olds, are people who just got out of college and lost their tools, lost their community, and they want to keep that stuff. So they go to these places so they can open businesses, so that they can create art, so that they can, wow, work wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm going to go here so I can make some art after work and feel better about who I am. Holy cow. And then we've got boomers, folks at or near retirement with a lifetime of wisdom and experience to share and the discretionary time to do it. They've also got lots of tools and equipment in their workshops and sheds just doing nothing. So they bring that stuff down to these places and share it. What happens when you put these 3 generations together is you get these mentoring relationships between them. The teens are showing the boomers how to use Facebook while they're building robots, and the boomers are telling the teens why to use Facebook. And the Gen Xers in the middle are translating all of the acronyms. Now, I want to show you some specific examples. Did you know right here in Madison, you have one of these spaces? It's a makerspace, a hackerspace called Sector 67. That's because, this place was started by a man named Chris Meyer. He's a great guy. Check out the floor plan he set up. There's an open workshop space with tables, sewing machine. You go over in the corner and there's couches around a table piled with Legos where you can prototype an idea and imagine something. And then right around the corner, there's a 3,000-pound CNC machine where you can actually make that thing you just thought of, or print it out of a 3D printer. There's a conference space where community groups have meetings and discussions. There's an electronics lab. There's a business incubator where entrepreneurs can get a desk and get their business going. So you guys have one of these things right here in Madison. I'll show you another example. In Milwaukee in 2002, a group of friends of mine and I started a place called Bucketworks. In our floor plan, we put together kind of an adult Montessori-style workshop environment. Anybody could make anything, right next to an art gallery space. And we invited corporate America to come in and innovate in our gallery space. And they loved it much more than their boardroom, right? We put in a coffee shop. We put in a computer lab right in the front door so community members could get online. We put in a coffee shop right next to the wood shop, right next to the theater and the performance space where groups would put on shows and have meetups and classes and discussions. And so these types of places are all powered by passion places. So I'm going to zoom you in on some stats from just one of these places. Okay? 68 new businesses, from high schools to high-tech companies, nonprofits to for-profits, started out of just one of these types of environments. Thousands of pieces of art. Inventions and electronic devices. That 3D printer that you could buy for under $1,000 was invented at one of these places. Plays, performances, and events, furniture and designed objects, hundreds of classes and programs offered freely, usually, to the community. Intergenerational collaboration, something we really need to understand. Project management practices in learning, and healthy use of social media. What I ask you to do is go to Sector 67, spend a day there, and see this stuff in action. Thank you.
All of the effort from my perspective started with an organization called Hack Augusta, and the idea was that we had all these great resources in town between Cyber Command and the Savannah River National Lab and the Medical University and so forth, and how could you take that and instill the same sense of innovation and collaboration that I enjoyed when I was in Silicon Valley. So we started organizing hackathons there in the city of Augusta, and after doing that for several months and spending thousands of dollars renting venue space, raising money from sponsors and then giving it back to whoever I was renting from, we decided to open up a space called the Clubhouse. And it was called the Clubhouse because, quite simply, we gathered all the different technology clubs that existed in the city of Augusta together into one place to work together to try to create positive change in our city. And so going back to that, we're an economic development organization that uses education as our primary thrust for how we do that. And we really try to instill the notion of creativity in everything that we do. We don't really talk about being a technology organization. Everybody else says that we're a technology organization. We're an organization that promotes creativity and promotes following your own passions and trying to create something for the world out of that. So, really briefly, what has that meant on outcomes, which I know we'll probably talk about more later, but we've gone from roughly about a $10,000 investment from a group of 7 people into what has turned into about a $5 million annual economic impact in the city of Augusta. We've probably had about $30,000 worth, or 30,000 volunteer hours that have been put in over the last 2 years trying to make the city of Augusta a better place. And, 10,000 people have showed up at our events. And so that's what happens when you get a group of passionate people to work together to try to make your community better.
Very impressive. Thank you, Eric. Josh? Oh, no, Eric. The other Eric.
Yes, my name is Eric Van Holm. I'm a doctoral student at Georgia Tech and Georgia State studying public policy. And what I'm specifically focusing on is makerspaces and their potential for entrepreneurship. How I sort of stumbled into this subject is my advisor and I were studying innovation. We were studying traditional forms of innovation and sort of the literature that economists have provided on how innovation occurs. And I sort of got interested in sort of what was happening new and what was going on in terms of crowdfunding and online commerce like Etsy. And with that, this small movement that no one had really heard of, the Makers Movement, and people producing craft items in small workshops. And so out of that has come this really rich beginning of study in which I've been able to start to catalog what is going on in makerspaces and where they are. And we're focused here on what's going on in Middle Georgia. But this movement has already spread nationwide. Every state has attempted to found a makerspace. I believe South Dakota doesn't yet have one that's actually established itself. There's probably about 500 active makerspaces across the country. But it's really hard to measure how many there are because there is no central directory where they list themselves and they have to register like a nonprofit does. But what they do is they list themselves on user-maintained directories where they can list themselves to try and find new members. And just in the last few months, as I've sort of continued to catalog how many there are on these user directories, it rose from 650 in July to 1,100 in October. And so this movement is expanding incredibly rapidly. And so as I'm trying to study it, what I'm really trying to pinpoint is why should the public be concerned? It's great that people want to come together and make things, but what I'm trying to understand is how does it influence entrepreneurship? What are the economic outcomes? How does it influence cities? And that's an open question for me. I certainly have formed impressions in my short period of study, and there are no answers yet, but that's the focus of what I'm working on, and that's my research so far.
Thank you, Eric. Josh, tell us about Athens.
Hi, I'm Josh Marsh. I'm the director of Hackyard Athens, which is a hackerspace in Athens, Georgia. I'm also an editor for Hackaday, which is an online magazine where I write a bunch of stuff about articles about people, what people are making. I also profile hackerspaces on there. So, Hackyard is a very new Makerspace. It started in about June, although we've been trying to get something off the ground for a while now, probably since December of last year. And we have only a handful of members at this point, but despite that, we have a pretty strong community, and we have a series of events that we host regularly, as well as some classes that we teach. We've had a couple of interesting success stories, although relatively small, beneficial to the community. And there was a guy who, our space is in an office building, which is by far not ideal. But across the hall from us, this is all in a big startup community. Across the hall from us, this guy who was doing a tech startup would come by and start visiting, just because I was in there and I had a 3D printer and he wanted to see what all those funny noises were. So he would come and visit over and over again and kept asking me questions about the 3D printer to the point where I was getting annoyed. Still a very friendly guy. And then I left for the summer to teach, and when I came back, he had not only put together his own 3D printer, but he had started asking if he could be a member, and subsequently if he could teach classes. And we now offer a 3D printing class where you come and you leave with a 3D printer. It's a $600 class, but you get a printer. And that's been very profitable for him as starting his own business, both as he's printing things for people and selling those prints, but he's also making a little bit of money teaching the class too. And it's been very helpful for us because it helps expand our community, and that's been one of the real crucial things that we've discovered, is that the community doesn't quite exist, or we haven't quite found all of them in Athens, and so we've been trying to build it through classes. So.
Thank you. Greg, tell us about Rome, Seven Hills.
Sure. Hi, I'm Greg Richardson, and I guess my day job, I work with Bailey at Cividium, and we started a makerspace in Rome, Georgia, which is my hometown, about, I guess we're coming up on our fourth year anniversary. We were the second makerspace, I think, to develop in Georgia. There are maybe a few things that make us a little bit unique. I think we share many common traits with all the spaces that have developed in terms of the focus areas that we have. But we've gotten a lot of attention. We were recognized as one of the most interesting makerspaces in America by Make Magazine just a few months ago. I think we were one of 6 on the East Coast that were designated. We occupy a beautifully restored 150-year-old Masonic lodge, and it's right in downtown Rome. It's a really beautiful facility, and we're really fortunate to have an inspiring space to have the makers work in. And I guess the third thing I'd say that makes us a little bit unique is that 2 years ago we started an outgrowth project called Maker Village, and you can find out information at makervillage.org. Maker Village is looking at what happens when you take maker culture and you move it out of a space, out of a central location, and you extend it out into the community. And in particular, what impact does that have on entrepreneurship? So what Maker Village is basically 5 properties, they're homes in downtown Rome. We took those 5 homes and we connected them to gigabit per second internet service with a local partner, Parker Fiber, in Rome. We worked it out so that the rent was very, very cheap in terms of what an entrepreneur could get in. We didn't require that entrepreneurs sign long-term leases. They could really do even month to month if they wanted. And also anyone occupying as a business, Maker Village would also have membership at Seven Hills Makerspace. And so we kind of established a tie. Part of the motivation for that, in addition to, Bailey and I have this interest in our business in following trends and technology that affect economic development. So part of this was an experiment, but the particular focus on Maker Village was to understand what happens when you take a bunch of makers and you put them together in a makerspace. Many of them will tell you that we don't have any interest in commercializing what we do. We don't have any interest in incubators or venture capital or any of those things. They really are motivated by their creativity and their desire to make. So Maker Village was a channel out of that for makers who were involved in projects that had a creative aspect, but they wanted a place to go and get kind of the next level of support. So that's, I think, sort of a nickel tour of what we're doing in Rome.
Thank you, Greg. Okay, Jay, you're up.
Well, my name's Jay Flesher. I'm with Crowdsource Innovations of Middle Georgia and also Flint Energies. the great thing about where all these locations are is they have great downtowns. If you notice, Houston County, Warner Robins is a great industrial city. It does not necessarily have a great downtown. And sort of that is the spin that we've gone off of as far as what we're trying to do in our venue. We're sort of taking the lead from the 21st Century Partnership, which is the group that goes, defends, it helps defend the base against BRAC. And they took a 11-point study, and in that study it had a couple of things. And one of the first points was recruitment and retention of STEM engineers, STEM professionals. And so in a lifestyle area, we have very, we struggle with that as far as we can get a STEM professional to come down and sign a 3-year contract, but then at the end of 3 years, he's or she is moving on to somewhere else. So we want to try to use this facility as a tool to keep those people engaged in the community, give them a place to hang out and do it. The other part of that is in recruiting and retention of engineers, we thought that it would be best if we could organically grow Middle Georgia engineers. And by having a location where they can come in and vet their ideas and learn from people already in the industry and have that mentorship type of personality, that not only can we take them from activating what they're learning in school, it will activate them as far as going on to engineering and hopefully come back, and then they don't have that life cycle shock of coming to Middle Georgia after being in a large city like Atlanta or somewhere like that. And then the final part of it goes back to almost a freelance of innovation and entrepreneurship. It's important for us to diversify our economy. We do have the largest industrial complex in the state of Georgia, but it's still important for us to diversify our economy locally. That's important to us. It's important to the defense contractors and the Defense Department. So those are 3 very mechanical-minded aspects as to why we want to do something creative in our makerspace. So that's sort of the end result.
Great. Excellent summaries, everyone. So I'm going to start off with a few questions, and then I hope you will join me. So let's begin. We've heard a little bit about what these various makerspaces stories are, but what exactly is a makerspace, and maybe what does it have to do with hacking, and how is it similar or different than an incubator? So I would like to ask Eric Van Home and Josh to respond to this question.
Yes, and so that's something I could give an hour lecture on, trying to explain all the differences of those terms. There are a lot of terms out there floating for sort of similar spaces. You may have heard of a hacker space, a hacker lab, a fab lab, a tech shop, or a maker space. Let's just generally say that they're all the same for now. That's actually what I would argue, but let's just say that they're the same. And generally what we're referring to is a community workshop where people share access to tools and knowledge. And so the best sort of comparison you can make is to a gym. Because you go to a gym, you pay a monthly fee, and you have access to all of the equipment there, and you're able to use it. And then if you just imagine that the other gym members teach you how to do the bench press, it sort of becomes a better comparison. But the price is about the same, and the idea is sort of the same. The big difference with an incubator, which some people want to sort of turn makerspaces into, and some may already be, is that an incubator is specifically directed towards business. If you're going to an incubator, you're not going to learn how to make yourself a table, and then you take your table home, and that's it. If you're going to an incubator, you're trying to take your business to the next level. And there's many businesses in makerspaces, but there's no hobbyists in incubators. And makerspaces are home to hobbyists, they're home to businesses, they're open to social entrepreneurs, they're open to sort of anybody you can imagine, tinkerers, crafters. There's dozens of terms for who uses a makerspace, but incubators are much more specific in what they're trying to do.
Josh.
Where to start? So I would agree with most of those things. I think one of the biggest differences, and so in trying to pitch Hackyard Athens to people and explain to them what it is, and they say, what is a hackerspace? I tend to say, well, it's a community, and then I stop and I wait for them to say, were you going to say anything else? And then I try to explain it from there. So it seems like I have it in a very succinct package, and I really would just otherwise ramble on. It's difficult to explain what it is, and I think that the gym membership does encapsulate fundamentally what's going on there, but like you were saying, with having the different people who are there come and teach you how to do the exercises, the community aspect, I would say, is stronger than having the access to the tools, and I would much rather have access to those people and their guidance versus, I would be okay with, maybe not okay with, but it would start to be more of a makerspace to me if it were an empty building that a bunch of people came and hung out with, around, rather than a garage with a bunch of tools and nobody's ever there except for you, and then you leave and somebody else can come in. Anyway, I can tell you what a makerspace isn't, or at least what in our definition at Hackyard Athens, and some things that I've encountered when I've been asking directors of other spaces what problems they've had or what they try to steer clear of, and bring up the incubator makes this a little more obvious of the difference here. Our space is inside of what is essentially an incubator. I think there's 20 or so businesses in the same building, and we just occupy one room. It's a big room, but still we're surrounded by people who are very business-oriented. They have a product that they're trying to get finished and get out. And we've had a number of people come to us and say, hey, can you help us with the hardware portion of this? We don't know how to do 3D printing. Can we come by? We'll give you a couple $100, and you, as a space, make this thing for us. Well, I've been trying to quell that because that doesn't really speak to what the space is supposed to do. It's supposed to foster a community, at least in our opinion. And when you become this kind of outsource resource for different companies, and you're just churning out things for them, they're not really benefiting in terms of learning how any of that works. And there are people in the same building who, having seen me do things, have wanted a 3D printer and have come by and asked and shown interest, and I think that they might take that class, for instance, and then they could do things for themselves. But yeah, there's a very thin line between kind of making things for people like you're a company, but not really. And sometimes you get really bizarre requests, like Freeside in Atlanta has had people call and say, can I put on a puppet show in your space, because they don't know where the space is and they think that it's just a resource that they can rent out. So yeah, I think there should be a clear distinction between the business side of things and the making side of things. So.
Okay, great. Well, that's at once clear and murky, which is perfect for a new initiative. So let's move on to Rob and Nadia. So I have been following Eric Van Holm's work, and one of the things I noticed is more than half of the makerspaces seems to fail. And you're just getting started with your makerspace. I'm wondering if you could talk about what you're doing to encourage success and some of the challenges you're facing in setting up your makerspaces.
I think the part that we all like to skip to is when something is able to be shown to the community as a success, but it really starts months, if not years before that, in laying the foundation. For Spark Macon, I think what was very important was having a foundation that was based in research, as well as having a team together that could touch on different points, not only of the community, but different knowledge areas and different strengths. And I would like to start there, and then...
Well, I think what I'd add as far as what we've done to try to avoid the failure, right, is, well, we drove around the state, we knocked on doors of these great gentlemen, we said, okay, what doesn't work? And they actually answered the question. And so we thank you to Michael Rosario for taking copious notes, which is what he does really well. We were able to go back and say, okay, well, we don't want to do that, we do want to do this. So I think a lot of it starts in that. And I think the other part that we did well was the crowdfunding we did for the Spark Makerspace. While it raised a little over $11,000, what it really raised was community awareness and membership awareness. And while it's, Andrew earlier spoke to the fact that, doing that was sort of would have happened anyway because members were already committed. Well, what it did was it showed there was a community already. There are 40-plus people willing to buy memberships to a space that does not yet exist, and we can show them a dirty area. So I think that's sort of some of the things we did to initially avoid failure. I mean, going forward, it's now going to be doing all the things we've said. We've had a lot of great ideas and a lot of energy. Now it's, put up or shut up. So yeah, we're in that point.
Okay, great. Thanks. So let's move on to several of these makerspaces have had an amazing amount of success. And I know they've already mentioned it, but let's have Eric and Greg talk about some of the successes they've had and some of the challenges they've faced in obtaining these kinds of outcomes. Oh, did I?
Guess I'll go first. Hi. Okay. So our outcomes and how we got there and so forth. So really, it's going back to that question of what is a makerspace. I think because for us, it really is a fellowship of people who are inspired to really pursue whatever it is they're passionate about in their life. And you know, we talk about these outcomes, and all it is people trying to share what it is that they love with the community. And so we always talk about don't come in here and ask somebody to do something for you. Come in here and do what it is that you want to do. And so when we hold our hackathons every month, it's a 4-hour event on First Fridays, and we just say, you have 4 hours to make whatever it is that you want to make, and at the end of 4 hours, you're going to present it in front of the community, and we're all going to vote democratically on what we think is the most awesome thing that was created this night. And that's in essence what we do. And we get the people that come in all the time and say, hey, you guys are smart. You can make whatever this is for us. And we had this real temptation of, well, as a space, should we start taking on these projects? No, that's really where we started making the transition to incubator, though, because we became the central place to find out, well, what are all the things that everybody in town needs? Because everybody keeps coming to us for every little problem. And so then people started coming up with solutions for those problems, and those became businesses, and that's where we got that success.
So how many businesses do you have?
So we have 24 companies that operate out of the space, but 10 of them were created in the space.
Wow. Okay. Greg?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of what has worked well and what hasn't, one of the things that I guess I would point to is it's very difficult, from my experience, to get these spaces to escape the gravity of the founders. We had a small group of founders. There were 3 of us, myself, Tricia Steele, who runs a web development and marketing company, Sci Digital in Rome, and the dean of the business school at Barry. So we had a really nice chemistry there. We had a nice mix of people who had different interests, and we were all aligned and we were good friends. But I think what I found over time was that people would come together at the space when we would organize a member night, or when we would maybe organize a hackathon, and it's very, very active and there's a flurry. But when we stepped away, we didn't necessarily see these new organic groups of people spark their own interest groups. And if we would come into the space just at any time, day or night, on occasion, there wasn't a lot of activity there. There was a lot of idle time. So, that was one of the things I think we've really struggled with, is how to be a strong founder and be involved in kind of sparking it and getting it going, but not becoming something that holds it back in terms of, all of us are volunteers. I think all the folks I know have day jobs. We have to go make a living, and we can't make running a makerspace and building one and building that community, we can't make it the predominant thing that we do. So that's one of the things, I guess, in terms of what has worked well. So I think the founders, who the founders are and that makeup and that chemistry is probably one of the most important things. And for us, in particular, the dean of our business school at Barry is a maker himself, and he's just a great guy. One of the things that he brought is we now have a relationship with Barry where there are, this dean started a program at Barry called, we call it the Maker Major. It's basically an academic program focused on how do you study this issue in college? How do you study being a maker? He calls it creative technologies. That's sort of the formal name at Barry. Well, as a result of that, there are 34 students. The class was oversubscribed, and it has been so for 3 semesters. They have more kids who want in it than they can accommodate. We did an arrangement with Barry to where Barry took all of its maker equipment. There were multiple 3D printers, there were laser cutters, vinyl all kinds of equipment, and they brought it over to Seven Hills Makerspace, to our facility, and we gave 4 of the 34 students in the program keys to the space and made them lab assistants. They keep the space open as a lab assistant from 6 to midnight, four nights a week. And that's really been a breakthrough for us because, now for those of us who have day jobs and can't be there all the time, these students create a real active environment. It's also been really nice to get paid as a result of that from Barry, the contribution that they make towards the space for being able to provide an environment that the college couldn't provide on its own. So I would say that kind of speaks to building partnerships, and it also speaks to the makeup of your founders. Have your founders be like you're creating a board for a company. Look around and say, okay, who's the person to go raise money? Who's the person to keep us out of court? Who's the person to drive the brand and create awareness? And that's not by design, but that's the way it ended up for us.
And how many members do you have?
So at any given time, we have about 20 members. So it's not a huge membership. There was maybe 20% of those are junior. They're students. They pay a reduced rate, so that has sort of waxed and waned. But those 20 paying members are separate from the 34 students who are paid under Barry's program, who use the space throughout a semester. And so really, there's about 50 or 60 people in the community who use it on a regular basis.
Fantastic. So Jay, do you want to weigh in on challenges you faced?
Well, I mean, the largest challenge you face is obviously building your network of people. But from perspective of building your network of corporate partners is a big thing for us. I mean, Flint, who I work for, actually gave me quite a bit of money to stand up a makerspace, and I chose not to. And I didn't want to build it, and they would come type of philosophy on my particular side of it. I felt it was more important to build some continuity between the school systems and the base, the military base, some more corporate partners, and stand up shoulder to shoulder, because really and truly, when you start looking at the life cycle of a new startup makerspace, it's quite scary to invest a big capital sum into it and say, oh, here it is, and let's hope it goes. So really, creating the partnerships was very important to me. I spent a lot of time with Rob and those guys and traveling the countryside. Matter of fact, I was able to meet with Mark Hatch, who was one of the founders of Tech Shop. And he quite honestly said, if you give me $3 million and you have a population of 1.5 million, we can put one there tomorrow. And I said, well, the $3 million doesn't scare me. It's the 1.5 million people that scares me. But he did turn me on to some of the other resources like Fab Lab and some of those other ones that have very diverse settings. But I can tell you from my perspective that in Houston County, we're known for our education in K-12. And I wanted to build on that as a lead-in to really fostering the next step, the next growth of organically growing, not only industry, but also in growing those organically growing those engineers. And then just taking them from being a consumer to being a producer. The belief is that I have is if I can take a kid that's in a classroom that is looking to buy something, and all of a sudden he's sitting there saying, how can I make that? And then actually making it, then you get somebody that's a lifelong engineer that will be a lifelong maker.
Wonderful. Thank you. So, okay, I have horrible eyesight, but I've asked Bailey White to read these Twitter comments and pick out a question to ask our panel. Bailey?
Well, there's one up here that I think is very relevant right away, and that is from Michael Rosario, who asks, how do you grow the next generation of makerspace leaders so it's not just about the founders?
Okay, well, Greg, do you want to say a little more about that?
I'm not sure if you figured that out. Just that should have been my question, because I don't really know the answer either. I would say this.
It's my question too.
Yeah, right. I know. What'd you say, Michael?
You have more hits than us.
Oh, yeah.
We're at the starting line.
Well, let's see. I think I'd answer it this way. I think it's happening anyway. I don't think there's a whole lot we have to do to engineer that. As I look around now, I mean, Jay and I met down in Warner Robins before. We've got our friends from Columbus over here with Jim and Frank and Lucas, who are involved right now in planning their own makerspace. All of these folks up here. I would say that based on my knowledge, I would say that Georgia overall is probably one of the top 2 states in the country in terms of how this is happening. The the vibrancy of it, the pace of this happening. New Jersey is probably the other state where there's great leadership. I would also add, just a shameless suck-up, we owe a big debt of gratitude to Bill Price. While Bill has been not just a contributor to these spaces in terms of helping them financially through grant programs, but he was one of the first visitors we had at Seven Hills Makerspace and probably understood what this meant and has gone around and advocated that for within other state agencies and really helped us build a community. So I think you don't have to convince people to found these spaces. I think there's probably a pent-up demand out there now. What you have to do is we all have to support them. We have to support them in whatever way we can, sharing our successes and failures, contributing to their crowdfunding campaigns, sending them documents you prepared, and so on. That would be my thought on how you get the next generation. They're coming along.
I think we have some questions in the audience. I saw a hand up there.
Kind of the way I see it is makerspaces ought to be kind of the independent STEM programs, you know what I mean? And maybe working more jointly with schools, you know, high schools and colleges. Mostly, well, maybe even with a focus towards some of the schools that can't afford to implement a STEM program, you know what I mean? So that's where I think the next leaders of makers should be coming from. So.
Thank you. Comment?
Real quick on that, yes, I agree. I think it's, if you're focused on the youth, I think that's where you're going to have to get, right? But that's where you're sort of dealing with the need for, you know, how do we get the school systems to want to collaborate with an outside entity that may be coming at this a totally different way from their perspective. And you know, you've got groups like the Scouts that are trying to put these clubs and groups together. How do we support them? And whether it's the, you know, the Museum of Arts and Sciences. So yeah, we're trying to figure out, you know, where all can we connect with the community, because you know, my perspective is I always say my big win is if we have 40 maker spaces in Middle Georgia. That's an absurd number. But theoretically, you want them where the people are. So if it's in a school or if it's in a clubhouse or wherever it is, that's where you want to give them the resource and the tools. So, you know, we started off believing that while we're starting something in Macon, what Jay does down in Warner Robins is just as important to us as what we're doing. And I think it's the same thing the rest of this group has sort of started off with. So yeah, it's ultimately how do we connect and provide all those avenues.
I wanted to mention that if that's something that you're interested in, you should definitely look into library makerspaces. Libraries have always been the place that you go for knowledge, and libraries are turning into makerspaces as a way to reconnect with the 21st century. And it's happening in local schools in Macon, and it's happening around the nation. So that's another tie-in.
Okay, we have a question here, and then I think there's one over there.
I'm fascinated by this. It's like your own culture and ecosystem. I just never put it together that this is out there. And I was curious, is it spurned from like an evolution from like somewhere in the middle of the U.S., or was it created simultaneously all over the place? How did it come about? It's really cool.
Well, okay, earlier I mentioned that there's all these different terms for makerspace, and that's partially because it did kind of rise up independently in a few different locations. Hackerspaces came about because when computers were sort of the only thing you could manipulate and make, you know, people started to get together and work in computer clubs on projects. And Fab Lab comes from a class at MIT where the class was called How to Make Almost Anything. And what they did was essentially opened up their tools to students, and the teacher said, you know, make whatever you want to. And so that idea of tools and making sort of became its own idea. And then the makerspace comes from Make Magazine, which has its own, you know, thread of where it comes from. And so it sort of arose independently in several different locations, and that's why there's all these different names for it. There wasn't someone that woke up one day and said, boy, it would actually be fun to make something. But it's fed into a need that a lot of people had across the country, and I think that's why it's risen so quickly, because there was no way to make yourself anymore. The tools had become too expensive. We used to work on our cars, or obviously I didn't, but people used to work on their cars in their garage, and it's because the tools you needed was a wrench, a hammer, and the car you already owned, and so you could actually afford to do that on your own. But now you need a $10,000 3D printer to do some of these processes. And so that's why the community aspect came together to sort of share the cost of these tools and make it all affordable. And so it's definitely risen in the last decade, really, and it's risen, independently in a lot of locations.
Josh, Greg?
If I could add to that, there's first of all, it'll never be possible to write the history of this because it's an organic thing and there are too many lineages, but there is an interesting story, I think, in terms of how we think about the history of the movement that we relate to. There was an event that happened in Germany for many years that was sort of like Burning Man for geeks. I mean, it was a huge event where just crazy geek-related things were happening. In 2007, there were 3 individuals who were friends, one in Washington, D.C., one in New York, and one in San Francisco. These are actual individuals. You can go look. They went to this Burning Man for Geeks festival. They came back inspired because what they saw was the development in Germany of these spaces. They started Noise Bridge in San Francisco. They started Hack DC and is it Sector 67 in New York? The one in New York that the MakerBot printer. The New York NYC resistor, sorry. So they came back and started those spaces. And we tend to think, I'll put it this way, on a very personal level, when I was researching this in 2010, that was the story that I had latched onto. There was a lot of movement. Those guys and the efforts that they had made were getting some attention, kind of underground, but were getting some attention, and we were really inspired by that, as I think many, at least major urban cities, generally followed that trend, and it was an inspiration for us.
I might just ask Josh to comment on this from a community perspective, user perspective.
Sure. Well, so there's one thing that I've got to get out of my head, or it'll be stuck up there. I think that and then I'll do the community thing unless this applies. I think one of the other aspects of why this is so appealing is that people in different panels have said today that risk-taking has kind of changed, right? People want safe bets for investing and that kind of thing, and universities, it's difficult to get grants, and you have to spend a lot of time writing those, and there's scientists who are quitting because it's too hard to take the time to do that instead of doing this really interesting work. I think that R&D has just kind of been put onto the community and the individual, right? I don't think that we don't have a Bell Labs, right? We have Tesla, but they're these kind of outliers that are making these really unique products. But on the whole, it isn't being done by the corporations anymore. So now what was I supposed to do?
Well, that's good. Thanks. I saw a hand over here. Otherwise, maybe the Columbus people, someone from Columbus, can you talk a little bit about your makerspace and maybe pose a question?
Thank you guys for mentioning Columbus. We are brimming at the rim in Columbus with maker ideas, watching every single one of these groups sort of proliferate knowledge and develop these incredible communities. So, my question actually brims from that. It would come into the effect of, if you were going to give advice to create a makerspace, what would be the steps? What would you advise?
Open it.
Just do it, right?
Yeah, seriously. I heard the comments about building partnerships, and believe me, there's many times I wish we had more community partnerships, because this has been 3 years of volunteering full-time for the community, and it does get old. But the only way you're ever going to open it is to just open it, and people start to support you when it does happen. And maybe it's not going to be enough to pay a salary, but I know you do plenty well on your own with your business. So just put your business in the makerspace.
Real quick to that point, I think when we went through this research, it was probably I was the guy in this group who went, "This is the dumbest idea in the world." I mean, I spent like months going around going, "This is a really dumb idea," until I met Greg and understood. I think I met Eric after that, but understood basically these things start when you have somebody who can take this risk, and this risk is, and quite frankly, we have the lowest personal risk out of any of these people in this group, and I will tell you that the risk I still have is pretty high, but it's when someone's willing to go, "Damn it, we're going to have this thing," and you just stand it up. I think you stand it up and you go, and the whole idea of you make it and then they come, or do they come and then you make it. I think at some point somebody has to jump off the cliff, and every one of these people up here, I think to a great degree, are cliff jumpers. We all just sort of go, "Yeah, we've got a set of plans for an airplane, and I think we've got the right parts. Let's just step off, and if we're wrong, we'll fabricate. We'll fly while you're falling, and we'll 3D print the pieces we're missing." I mean, that's sort of what we're doing.
Yeah, and I mean, I also don't think, as far as escaping the gravity of the founders, I think what it is how do we give the founders the rocket fuel they need to succeed? Because, we get more people that are involved when we have the time to be there. Like, the one skill that I think is common between us is we happen to somehow be decent at organizing these communities. And so we can see what these communities do to benefit, the greater region. And so how do we then support the people who are making that happen is where I would.
And I would agree as far as just getting it started. It's great to build a continuity of partners, but at some point you do have to take that leap of faith that it is going to make it. You have the right pieces. And if you don't just start it, it is very emotionally taxing as well, as far as am I doing it the right way?
Either way, you got the bug. So
Yeah, either way it's painful, so just do it.
We have a question there.
Hi. I have basically a two-part question. First, I want to bring it home a little. As a parent, how can I get my children involved and with me in the makerspace? This lifestyle or just get involved anyway. And the second is, as a parent, what resources would I need to bring? Would I need to buy, $10,000 worth of equipment or soldering iron, or what kind of resources are available?
So, I'm guessing you're probably local make, and so it'll be a more direct question for these guys. But the kids that come to our space, we host a young makers group, and they come twice a month, the second and fourth Thursday every evening, and it's $2 is what they need to bring. And the willingness to experiment and try new things.
Okay.
Yeah, so first off, Michael, please write that down because that's a good idea. And second part, so I think two-part question. Yeah, thank you. Two-part question. So I would say that first off, it's yourself and an interest and a desire to inspire your children and see them try things. So I think you know $10,000 worth of stuff. That's what we have. If you've got some cool stuff, bring it because we always want more cool stuff. But if you don't, you come. And then it's the group is, especially here, we're looking for what all can we inspire them to do, right? A lot of us are technologists, so we're looking at all the Lego we do and all the robotics and the lily pads and the Arduinos, but we're looking for them the art side of things. So it's a desire and an interest, and we're hoping the kids will say, well, I want to do that. And then it'll be on us as the adults, right, to go out and figure out, well, where do we find those resources to let them do that and try that? So the space is supposed to be what the makers make it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I thought I saw a hand there. Did you have a question? Okay, let me come here first.
How do you handle issues such as ownership, liability, and cover your monthly overhead? Uh-oh.
Okay, so
we're out of time, I think, Eric.
Officially? Well, there's a couple levels to think about that question. So I'm actually going to take a broader look at that, which is that the clubhouse started as a private for-profit LLC, and between that we had 7 partners, and it became a very toxic situation for what we were trying to do, because all of a sudden the subject of equity in every single thing that was coming up was a very big deal. And if somebody wasn't paying, it was kind of like, well, do we take away your equity in the business, or do you just owe us money? And there's all these really weird things that were destroying the culture. So I'm a pretty firm believer that the spaces themselves should be nonprofit. They're for the community. They're really community owned. They're board governed, and so forth. And so that's the shift that we've made. And since we made that shift, we've grown substantially, and we're moving to a facility that's 6 times the size of what, yeah, Cass. We'll show you later. But no, so that part, that's hugely significant. And then what you really have to do is say, okay, let's take this idea and translate it all the way down through the culture. And so everything is a community resource. This is a sharing economy. Nobody owns anything. You've signed a liability waiver, and we're not responsible if you cut your finger off, but, this is a community resource, that kind of thing.
So
Correct.
Let's have Greg and then Nadia.
So from our standpoint, there's some real practical things, and there's a lot of common sense. So we have a commercial liability policy. We went to an insurance company and said, here's what we are. The hardest part they had was finding a category. And they said, well, what are you? And, oh, boy. we can't even explain what a makerspace is to an audience of technology people. So we solved that problem, and Rob and I had a lot of discussions as they were getting Spark Making going. Sounds like the approach works, which is tell them something very simple and straightforward, you're a community group. So we got that in place. That's important. Second thing is we have a standard waiver. You can download ours, and many of the other sites have those online. And it basically is very detailed, and it just says whatever happens to you, you're on your own, and it's not our fault. Cut your arm off, et cetera. So there's a very protective waiver. All the members have to sign that. And then the third thing, which relates back to minors again, is that we don't allow minors in the space without a parent or guardian. We want a safe place for them, both in terms of equipment use and things like that, but also just in terms of, another maker using profanity, right, that isn't appropriate for kids. I mean, there's just certain kinds of safeguards that we think most parents want, and the way we resolve that. We've gone around that rule a few times. We have a 16 and now 17-year-old member who's been with us for 2 years, and once he got his car, I know his dad personally, and he was given a key, and we just went on with it. But that's very sort of case by case. You look at risk and deal with those things. But fortunately, all the spaces that have gone, not only in Georgia but the rest of the country, there's a lot of material and approaches, and generally spaces are very good about sharing. They really want to share to help others.
And so from our perspective, ours is sort of weird, right? Because we ended up with a grant that had some attachments to how we accomplished this, and then you get into the whole somebody has state liability. So from our perspective, we're a private LLC. It's a for-profit structure, but I gave all control theoretically to a board of directors. I own all the liability, and it was a structure that had to work to make our space make sense right now. Maybe a 501 makes sense at some point. I haven't had enough time to study that. I'm too busy making a makerspace right now. And then we've stolen their liability waivers. But I think speaking to other community groups, you're right. You just keep it simple. I'm not sure if Mike and Pat aren't in the room right now, but I went to go see the Chamber of Commerce probably 5 times. And each time they've told me I'm crazy, but they've understood it a little more. Each time I've gone, refined my pitch to them. But it's keep it simple, stupid, and that's about the best way we can explain it out in the community, too.
Josh, do you want to say anything about how you handle that?
I will. So when I went to visit Freeside in Atlanta, this is speaking to the issue of ownership. When they started, they had individual sections that was, this is Bob's space and this is Susie's space, and they would work at these little workstations, and that's a terrible idea. If you start to carve off these little islands, then everyone gets territorial, and the hacker community is regrettably very elitist thinking sometimes, and they're, I know more than you do, so any way to kind of break that up is always good. But Freeside changed that, and they divided everything up into zones. So there's an electronics area, there's a wood shop, and that's how most spaces that I'm familiar with are divided up into purpose for what you're making, and that eliminates these kind of territorial disputes and people thinking that they're better than somebody else or wanting to withhold information. It got really nasty, apparently. But now it's great.
Good. One more question.
What type of fees do you charge for membership, and what does that entail as far as benefit goes?
So we're full members are $80 a month. We offer a student rate for $40 a month, which we tend to lose money on, so we sort of control the number of those, just utilities and things like that in the space. So our model has been kept really, really simple. I'll tell you, we probably will adopt some of the things that we've seen Spark Making develop, both in terms of who gets a key, what the rate structure is. They put a lot of thought into this and really built on what had been done out there so far.
Rob, so
for our perspective, it's $20 for a student, but that's going to have a parent attached to it. It's $40 for a standard member. We have an $80 keyed member, and quite frankly, this whole last 24 hours we've been having the debate with all these guys about how we handle the key. We may shift some things around in regards to it's either pay $80 or contribute to the space through effort, and then there's $120 a month family membership. So if you do the math, I got 2 parents and 3 kids, it's cheaper to buy a family membership. So it's those structures, and that's it. You have access to everything once you get certified, which we're stealing from you, on Tinker certified on the different spaces. We don't want people in the wood shop cutting their arms off, preferably.
Eric?
So we We have a basic a la carte structure where it would be $15 for day use, but you begin to get discounts for that in lots of various ways. Because what we really try to do is drive everybody towards some sort of recurring monthly membership model. And so the basic membership is $20 a month. And once you pay $20 a month, you get discounts in all of our classes. The day use rate drops to $10 a month. We also have the kind of $100 flat fee for the month, and you get to use desk space. You get to use all the tools and equipment. If you want your own private office, that's $500. So basically, we have a range anywhere from $20 to $500 a month, depending on how much you're getting.
Josh?
We're still trying to attract members. So right now, we have a founding member price for $50 a month. But I think the target is like 75 or 80, somewhere in there. It also depends on what kind of space you have. And so right now, the aesthetic of office building isn't very inviting or appealing necessarily. So the idea being that the people who really want to see the space happen because they fundamentally understand what it can be, that they'll buy in early and or despite what the space may look like. And then once it turns into the cool warehouse or something later, then it'll be easier to get people to cough up the $75 or something.
And join me in thanking our panel. They were excellent.